Honk. Tom Robbins, Jitterbug perfume. Page 178. I think that's where we left off. I did the little thing right there, like that. So, I'm just guessing.
For a week, they fasted. They meditated for hours each day and bathed repeatedly.
It's delicious. Tater tot burritos are good. Honk. Alright, let's see.
For a week, they fasted. They meditated for hours each day and bathed repeatedly. They made love between baths and resisted climax, holding the orgasmic cyclone inside themselves, channeling it up their spinal columns into their brains. Then, one afternoon, the green bluish of April still upon the city, they closed the shop an hour earlier than usual, and climbed the stairs, one of them for the last time.
Oh, shit. I think they're about to dematerialize.
The experiment was to be conducted in their small sitting room. After a brief discussion about whether or not they should disrobe, they concurred that nudity might distract Pan, who was to monitor the attempt, and they remained but for their shoes.
Oh, their clothes remained, but for their shoes. They took off their shoes.
Fully clothed upon the threadbare carpet, a far cry from the rugs that had purred to their buttocks in Constantinople. They sat cross-legged, facing one another. They closed their eyes, and just then there was a commotion in the street. Excited voices were being raised outside their shop. Alabar asked Pan to investigate. "I be a god, not an errand boy," grumbled the old fawn, but he hobbled downstairs nevertheless. The ruckus was caused by the monks. For more than a year, ever since Pan moved into the neighborhood, things had not been right at the monastery. The good brothers had become increasingly plagued by erotic dreams. Dreams of lascivious nature are fairly common among those whom the church requires celibacy. But the frequency and intensity of the dreams on rule-quelled Balugs resist sleep and walked about heavily lidded and nervous. Others lived for bedtime, and during the day appeared drained, weak, disinterested. Rome dispatched an exorcist to uproot their torment. But the sticky demons mocked his incantations. He himself was visited by a succubus of such seductive talent that upon awakening he packed his exorcisery tools and returned to the Vatican. The abbot, too, was stricken. At least twice a week, he was stiffened by creamy visions. The other nights, he told his confessor, he dreamed of rabbits caught in snares, of snakes that swallow birds' eggs whole, of trailing vines that threaten to rip me up, of rock slides, ooze and foul, yammering hornets, belching vultures, yellow eyes that peer out from the hollow trees, and all manner of disagreeable things such as Satan has strewn about God's perfect world. Things such as I have not seen since my boyhood in rural Providence. The monks under the authority were subject to these rural nightmares as well, if they weren't being tortured by the rub of feminine thighs. They were being nauseated by the drool of he-bears eating their cubs. Late in the evening, a person afoot on Rue Balus might by the moans and shrieks of sadistic protests, have imagined themselves passing not a monastery, but a hospital or a brothel or a combination of the two. More and more the monks came to suspect that the incense shop was the source of their collective possession, despite the aromatic stuffs that were its stock in trade. There was often a gammery odor about the place, a smell, as the abbot put it, of such wild meats as country rogues doth eat. Never had the shop's owners been seen at mass. There was a quality of physical well-being about them that was nearly supernatural. And the woman was perversely proportioned and jiggled shamelessly when she walked. Several monks claimed that she specifically haunted their cots at night. Still, the two shopkeepers were good customers of the perfumery and were known to cooperate in the acquisitions of raw materials. Moreover, the dream epidemic that had attacked the monastery but a year before, while the shop had been operating for well over a decade, the superiors urged restraints and placing blame, but accusations were whispered almost daily. And when, with the soft airs and fertile moistures of spring, the dreaming in the cubicles reached a hysterical pitch, small knots of agitated monks began to patrol the block, eager, it seemed, for something demonic to reveal itself. It was just such a group that on that fateful afternoon descended on a young man who was timidly rattling the latch at the shop's locked door. "What is your business here, boy?" asked one of the monks. "I am making delivery, father." "Delivery from whom?" "From the glass blower. I am his apprentice." This last the boy said profoundly. Oh, proudly. "And what is in the package?" "Why, glass, father, a glass bottle." "A bottle of what?" "A bottle of nothing." "Eh?" "The bottle is empty. The woman of this shop commissioned it from my master. Someday I will blow fine bottles myself." "Ah, hush! We shall have a look at this bottle." "But, your holiness," the monk cuffed the lad on the ear. It felt so good, he cuffed him again. "We shall see the bottle." Confused, the boy drew away, clutching the package to his silica-caked apron. His ear was turning as red as a horror's lantern. The circle of monks closed around him. "The bottle! The bottle!" they demanded. They forced the package from the frightened boy's grasp and tore it open. A shaft of afternoon sunlight illuminated a bluish container, shaped like a perfume vessel, though 3 or 4 times larger. As if focusing, the sun ray narrowed its beam upon a finely wrought figure embossed on the glass. It was the monk's turn to pale. For a moment or two, they were speechless, and there was a much trembling of skull cap and rosary. "'Tis him," one managed to whisper. "Him," repeated another, somewhat louder. "The incense shop and him," said a third. "'Tis what we thought all along. They are allied with Lucifer." The monk who was holding the dreadful object raised it, cocking his arm as if to dash it against the cobblestones. But lo and behold, the bottle squirmished free from his fingers and floated away, flying under its own power, or so it seemed to the terrified monks about 5 feet above the street. Slowly it bobbed down the block, round the corner, and disappeared. Only then, crossing themselves so furiously that it was a wonder no wrists were sprained, only then did the monks become fully aware of the vulgar aroma. Naturally, they assumed it was sulfur or brimstone that the bottle left in its wake. Entering the shop from the rear, a familiar route for the Greek, Pan fetched the bottle up to the sitting room, where Kudra admired it at length. Normally, Alabar would have been too concerned about the monks to pay attention to an oversized perfume bottle, but perspirations for the dematerialization attempt had so tranquilized him that he brushed aside all thought of events in the street, concentrating instead on the pale fruits of the glassblower's rod. How exactly the fellow copied your design? Yes, said Kudra. Isn't it splendid? Pan, it is you on the side. What do you think? Pan rarely replied to direct questions, but in this instance he did. Stampede, a flock of little sighs, hairy and witful, full of udders and quick feet running over a cliff. That's the sound he made. The rendering flatters you, I dare say, joked Alobard of Pan. And then to Kudra he said, it is a marvelous container for a potentially marvelous liquid. But alas, it is all academic now. We still haven't the what-you-call-it base note. And besides, if there are 3 of us can rematerialize ourselves in the new world, Pan shall not require a cover for his stink. Oh, I would not be so sure of that. He might find cover handy even in the wild and distant land, and should he need it not, well, still I want that base note. I want that perfume. I want this bottle filled with its intended contents. I want it for you and me, and now as much as for Pan. But why? Slowly Kudra turned the bottle in her hands. Then she sat on the floor between them. It was about 6 inches tall, square-bottomed, but rounded at the shoulders, with a short, flared neck, slightly fitted with a glass stopper. There was a ridge down each side of the body, seams left by the wooden mold in which it was formed. The neck, lip, and stopper were seamless, having been formed by hand and added after the blowing. On the bottom of the bottle was a scar not unlike an umbilicus, where an iron ponytail rod had held the hot, freshly blown bottle while its neck was being shaped. The cute little ponytail scar measured 1 cubic centimeter, the same on the average as the human navel. That it has room in its chamber. Oh, wait, what? That it resembled a Harley-Davidson motorcycle with a 1,000cc engine has room in its chamber for 1,000 belly buttons. A piece of information that may or may not interest the Hells Angels. The bottle glass was clear, but had a bluish tinge because of impurities, and it contained the odd bubble, ripple, and tiny bit of stone. One side of the body was embossed with an oval frame, within whose boundaries there was an image of none other than Mr. Goat-footed himself, in a jaunty stance, his horns freely displayed, his reed pressed to his leer, a garland of weeds encircling his bushy brow. The bottle was between them, and Kudra spoke over the top. The top of it. Just suppose, that we should become separated in our journeys into the other side. If we were marked by a unique scent, a fragrance all our own, we could always identify each other, even if the light was not clear, even if our vision was clouded or our shapes physically altered. We could find each other no matter if we were lost in the rooms of death. What kind of talk was a bit of spooky for Alabar's taste? He was like, oh. He suggested that they get on with the experiment. Well, he was still in the mood. So they shut their eyes and reset their breaths upon a circular track. Kudra's plan was that they should slow themselves down until their humors buzzed at a rate below that of the visible world, then merge with the vibrations and broadcast themselves through a crack. Which crack? Why, the crack at the top of the Indian rope trick. Okay, Alabar would give it a whirl. After all, his goal was always that had been to be complete. And were he restricted to occupancy of this one world, as round and fully packed as it might be, he supposed he could not claim completion. He was as nervous as a praying mantis at an atheist picnic. But he bore down gently, intensifying his concentration, letting go of his attachment to gravity, applying the brakes to his bodily functions. Just before he abandoned himself to the process, however, he heard Kudra whisper, "The bottle must be filled." There's a break right here. From corner to corner, silence webbed the room. Gradually there commenced a ringing in Alabar's ears. The sound was produced, no doubt, by his central nervous system, though he imagined it the ringing of the spheres. Stars, in fact, had begun to colonize the darkness behind his lids. At first they were faint and icy as the pimples on an albino's backside. But they grew in brilliance and size until a sewing basket of flaming buttons spilled on his head, and the great bear raked him with her sidereal paws. Motionless, he sat inside himself, as if in a planetarium. Neither a twitch nor a flicker, a pulse nor a discernible breath marred his smooth facade. His heart slowed until it seemed to have frozen in its burrow. His lungs were as immobile as sponges. The wheel rolled to a stop, and bubbles of oxygen slid off of it to skitter upon the surface of this stagnant blood, like water bugs attending to some dizzy business. He tingled, he sparked, and he rang. He felt light and loose and large. The more static his functions became, the more he seemed to expand, as if he had entered a state where there was progress without duration, advance without movement. He was becoming unstuck. He was sure of that. His bones were no longer wrapped in flesh, but in clouds of dust, in hummingbirds, dragonflies, and luminous moths. But so perfect was his equilibrium that he felt no fear. He was vast, he was many, he was dynamic, he was eternal. Then suddenly he was falling, not downward, but onward, beyond the horizon, as if the earth had an edge after all, and himself as a babe gnawing at the nipple of his great golden mother, as a child rolling in pine needles, as a youth swimming rivers. He witnessed himself in battle after battle, smoking, winding, rounding his helmet, bright sleeves stiff with gore. His occupied the throne, skinned a fox, drained a mead goblet, spread the yellow short hairs of an Alma, ruby in thrall. There, over the watchtower, was the winter moon in its ermine snood. Here, in the harem mirror, was his good old beard, Unsulling by silver, yonder was Nog, swagging a chicken in half. Here stood Wren, advice forming in her mouth like spittle. And oh joy, up bounded the huge hound, meek, jowls a drool, and tail a wag. Alabar embraced the dog and buried his face in its coat, only to be knocked back over by its overpowering odor. Upon first contact, the smell was acrid and offensive. But by the second or third whiff, it was acceptable enough. And by the fourth or fifth, downright agreeable. A shock of olfactory recognition over-berated in Alabar, and he said to himself, his light, loose, large, and falling self, "Ah, 'tis late in summer, and the dogs have been in the crops." The pageantry of his life continued to flash by, but he clung to the brief encounter with Meek, galvanized somehow by the familiar smell. And then it hit him. "That's it," he cried. "That's it." So deep was he in his time, so removed from exterior time, that he made no sound in the room. But he cried, "Methinks I have found it," with force enough that the breath wheel was jarred into motion again. A wild thump rattled his heart, and all at once his trajectory reversed itself, and he came flying back, shedding stars like dandruff, gaining weight, contracting, shrinking, until tumbled back over the edge into the shallow bowl of our reality. His plasma sluggish in the pump, his eyes pasted shut with some atomic glue, but voice finally audible in the little sitting room. "Kodra, I've got it!" A beet, by and large, has little odor. Its leaves, stalk, and famous red root are, to the nose, equally relatively bland. Around August, however, when the plants go to seed, a pungent and singular aroma rises from them, like a gaseous wrench that gives the surrounding atmosphere a sharp turn to the left, twisting it into a strange new configurations. When dogs run through August beet fields, the pollen dusts their coats, and then return to their master so strongly scented that no scour bush, however vigorously welded, will leave them fit to sleep in our house. As Alabar recalled, only time days of it would relive the dog of their odd olfactory burden. Odd, because once the nose was past the initial shock of it, it was not unpleasant. Yet, unless substantially diluted, its pleasure was difficult to endure. If the waft that streams from the freshly opened hive is intimate to the point of embarrassment, ask any sensitive beekeeper, so it is with beet pollen. There is something personal about it, and something primeval. If there is a comparable odor, it is indeed the moldy inner sanctum of some fermenting, bursting hive. But beet pollen is honey squared, royal jelly cubed, nectar raised to the nth power, the intensified secretions of the earth's Asperian gland, reeking of ancient bridal chambers and intimacies half as old as time. However, on nature's cluttered dressing table, there is no scent to truly match it. Not hashish, not ambergris, not decaying honey itself. Beet pollen, in its fascinating ambivalence, is the aroma of paradox, of yang and yin, commingled, of life and death combined in vegetable absolute, and Alabar initiated that it was the missing link in the evolution of the perfect perfume. Beet is our base note, he said. Why did I not think of it before? Ah! Maybe he was right. Beat Paulin had the muscle, the stamina, the tendency to both establish the jasmine and to stand up to its detractors. Like that rarity, the wise husband, it was strong enough to possess its mate, secure enough to allow her to her freedom. If Pan's musk was the dark and convulsive essence of animal behavior, then Beat's musk was its floral counterbalance, the olfactory interface, where the fuck of beasts and the pollinization of plants became roughly equivalent. Kudra, methinks I have found it. Kudra? Kudra? With effort, Alabar forced his eyelids apart. The light was piercing, but the pain passed quickly. He squinted, striving on focus. Slowly the walls came into relief and, in turn, the fireplace, curtains, furniture, an empty bottle at his stockinged feet. Kudra, alas, was not to be seen. He blinked furiously and rubbed his eyes with his fists. His vision was back to normal. That wasn't the problem. The sun was setting, but the room was still accurately lit. Adequately. Life is too small a container for certain individuals. Some of them, such as Alabar, huff and puff and try to expand the container. Others, such as Kudra, seek to pry the lid off and hop out. Both of these weren't going, said Pan from his post in the corner. Thou stopped and came back. She went. Naturally, Alabar was tempted to restart the experiment, to try to join her, wherever she might be. Upon reflection, however, he submitted to his truer nature and elected to wait for her return. As darkness fell, he lit candle after candle in the sitting room, identified to what the monks might think of the concentrated brilliance. Should any tiny part of her wink on, he didn't want to miss it. When by midnight, not so much as a chin dimple had shown up, he experienced alienated states of panic and relief. Panic that her disappearance might be permanent. Relief that he had not disappeared. At dawn, he blew out the candles, which had come to resemble the fingers of careless mill workers, and continued the vigil by sunlight. Above Pan's caterious snoring, he could hear carts creaking to market, birds blowing the bugs out of their pipes, and monks marching to and fro in front of the shop. But he couldn't hear the peeps from the other side. There was simply nothing left of Kudra but a pair of empty shoes. In some kind of desperate attempt to get her attention, he set fire to the left shoe and smoked it. He had just blown a ring about the size of her left breast, when how embarrassing! The gendarmes arrived. They arrested Alabar, charging him with heresy, blasphemy, Satanism, and witchcraft, and confiscated the new perfume bottle as evidence. Oh. Breaking into the Bastille was as easy as falling off a ewe for the invisible Pan. Less than 24 hours after the arrest, before the whips and lashes had gotten limber, Pan had liberated Alabar and the bottle as well, leaving nothing in their place but an awful smell. Immediately, they made their way to the incense shop. It was boarded up, and a heavy wooden cross was propped up against the front door. Prying boards loose from the rear window, they hurried upstairs. The sitting room was just as they left it. Kudra's right shoe lay unturned on the thin carpet, like a boat washed up on a desolate shore. It was barely 4 a.m, but already candles were exercising their little flames. Left, right, flicker, sputter, left, right. In the monastery halls across the street, Alabar knew he must get out of there. But first, He bundled up as much as fragrance equipment as he could carry and left a note in Kudra's shoe telling her to look for him in the beet fields of Bohemia. There we go. Just dog-eared this little page right here. And that's as far as we're getting today. Jitterbug perfume. I've read all that so far on YouTube, if you want to hear the rest of it. So, I've already read that far. We're on page 186 now. And that's my favorite part, the part where they dematerialize, or one of them does. But what happens next is great. So if we want to hear the rest, come on by. Or watch it on YouTube. You can watch the rest of it. And I'm always live on Twitch. Come on over there.